Okay, hopefully everything is working. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we are happy to have Andrew Reeder with us. And for those of us joining on YouTube next week is Sue Spade, who is a former museum director and curator. And she writes a ton of stuff. Lately, she has 5 books on art and ecology, and she's going to be talking to us about biodiversity and cultural diversity. So come back next week, same channel. I'm gonna stop my share for a minute. So again, welcome to all of you that are in both the class and are joining us publicly to the School of Art Visual Visiting Artist Lecture Series. I wanna also thank the SU Art Museum for hosting us on YouTube, and especially Emily Dittman. For those taking the class, after the Q&A, I'll hang out on Zoom if you want to talk to me about any questions about anything around the class. So tonight we're going to start off in a great way. We're going to have a conversation between Andrew Reeder and Bob Wysocki, who is the director of the School of Art. And the two of them have known each other since they were undergraduates. So think about that. The people you're taking classes with now, you're going to know them for a long time.
That's a nice way of saying we're really old.
And interesting, they both kind of started in architecture, and I really love how they both are world building still. Maybe not quite in the same ways they were as undergraduates at Berkeley, but and I'm sure we'll talk about that. And so Andrew has worked on just about every single thing you've ever seen. Avatar, Terminator Genesis, Tomorrowland, Star Trek, Tron, and of course, in the MCU universe, Avengers, Infinity War, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. He's a concept artist, but as you're gonna see, even his sketches are just amazing, immersive worlds. He also seems to do everything from painting to models to building environments and sets. And his work really gives me, and I think you'll get a sense of this too, a really strong sense of place and this wonderful kind of imaginary space that we're in, whether it's a planet or a spaceship or a corridor or a laboratory. So I'm going to let Bob and Andrew take it away. So please, everyone, clap to yourselves. I'd like to introduce Bob Wysocki and Andrew Reeder.
Thank you, Joanna. Very kind.
Yeah. Okay. Let me do this without messing this up. Hopefully you can see that.
How are we doing? Yeah, we're good.
Okay. That's it. Or I can show you family photos. So it's awesome. I'm gonna go in a tiny bit of background here on I think it was Andrew, 15, 20 years ago, our mothers were at a nursing school reunion, and they were trading notes on their children. And I believe your mother said, my son went to Berkeley in architecture, and they knew we were roughly the same age. And then he went to Yale for architecture. My mother said, my son went to, and it turned out that they had no idea we knew each other. Andrew and I have known each other since 1984. Ancient history to most all of you watching tonight. So it's awesome to be able to bring him to you tonight. He's in Los Angeles. I'm of course off my kitchen, and it's when I look at Andrew's work, there's official titles in the film world for what he does and what he was doing and how he got started out, but I really see him as an artist, a sculptor and an artist and an architect. And it's really, you're going to see the work is amazing. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. So we'll start off here, and this is, I think, this is a scene from Andrew. This
is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This was, we were just sketching away on trying to figure out what the Ego Planet was going to look like. The director, James Gunn, had said to our production designer, Scott Chambliss, I'm really seeing, I really like this image of fractal geometry, and I didn't know what that was. Nobody on the film knew, but it's very common at the beginning of a project. And, what we'll be doing tonight is sort of pulling back the curtain, hopefully without ruining anyone's, childhood dreams about what movies are about. But, it's very common at the beginning of a project for a director like James Gunn to have an image in his head about what he's thinking. For what Rocket looks like, or what some of the characters look like, or some of the worlds. So we knew that the Guardians were going to be coming to the Ego Planet. We knew we had to express it somehow with this fractal architecture. And we go through a series of sketches like this where we're trying to stumble upon, it's really a search for style, and that's one of the great things about Guardians is that, it's such a visual project. It really is in a world literally of its own.
I want this, everybody watching considers this to be a sketch.
Yeah, it's a sketch. I mean, definitely.
I know.
This is something that it's not tight. This is something I did for with a team of people, really, for Mouse Guard. This is a project that was an animated film, much like Lion King. We weren't really building it in a traditional way. There were a lot of people working on this. I was responsible mostly for the architecture. This is the Black Rock Keep. If you've read any of the books, and again, we had sort of this search for what these citadels were going to look like. There was an entire team of people expanding the world in the Unreal Game Engine. That's how this was done, around the architecture. So this image right here, very much a team effort. Yeah, this one right here this is Infinity War. It's actually Avengers Endgame. This is a scene where Thanos' forces have overrun the Avengers compound. We have this scene where typically the way it works is your manager will come to you, as mine did, on like a Friday and say, Andrew, we've got a scene in the Avengers basement. We think Tony's car is gonna be in it. We're not sure, but it's gonna be flooded. We've got Hulk, we've got Rocket. Hulk is holding up the floor. It's crashing down. Please show us what that looks like for Monday. So that's kind of the design brief that you get, and you really have to sort of. It's up to you as a concept artist. Then you're thinking almost like a cameraman. A director of photography is what it's called. Where do you put the camera? Your job as, and we'll get into this, when we talk about the two differences, set design versus concept illustration, but,
yeah.
It really is about startling the viewer. It's about spectacle. It's about emotion, and it's about spirit. And here, are we expressing something that's happy? Is it sad? Is it dire? It's a moment in the film. And you're presenting this to people oftentimes who are not visual. You're presenting it to, in this case, the Rousseau brothers, who are quite visual, but you're also presenting it to Kevin Feige and the Marvel executives who have varying levels of imagistic literacy, you might say. And so you can't, there has to be enough there for them to say, yes, this is exactly what we were thinking. That's how we pictured it. Or no, you guys aren't hitting it. We need to go another way.
And Joanna, can you send Bob Dacey the link again? Sorry, he's having some connectivity issues. Go ahead, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah. So this again, this was another scene in the Avengers compound. This is Hawkeye. If everybody recalls, Thanos dispatches his forces to overrun the compound and destroy the Avengers. There's an epic battle toward the end of the film. Hawkeye is wandering around, a bit like Aliens 2. These massive sort of tunnels, that are ostensibly underneath the compound. We actually built this as a set. But this was an illustration, and it was intended, for us to really get a feel for what this could be like in that moment. Hawkeye has got these grenade-powered, launchers that he's shooting at these creatures with. We know that they're going to burst into flames. We've got the textures, we've got the lighting, we've got the basic space that we'd already worked out and that we had constructed. But now it's time to have a conversation with our director and with the executives in terms of palette, in terms of lighting, showing a moment in this film and what we could expect from a lens standpoint. Because remember, movies obviously are shot with cameras, and we have to understand exactly what we're going to see with a particular focal length, and is that worth it? Is it justifying? What can we expect in this particular scene?
we probably should have started with this, but this if you go to Andrew's, if you obviously put in Andrew into IMDb, you'll see this. And he's worked on a lot of other things. We had, you'll see the top one that's filming. We had some Spider-Man, whatever the next Spider-Man is, but Andrew wants to keep working in the business, so we can't show that tonight. Tell us about this guy.
Okay, so this is Ming-Cho Lee, and he's now deceased, but for many years he was considered the Frank Lloyd Wright of American theater design. And I found out about him my first year in grad school. I realized at that point, this is a long time ago, it's back in the Stone Age, before the internet, it's before Facebook, before Instagram. I realized that I'd made an excellent choice academically for myself, in studying architecture, but I'd had a chance to work in architecture for 2 years before I went on to grad school. And I realized that I had made a really bad choice for myself professionally. 90% of that was my fault, largely due to a lack of skill and a lack of ability, but also a real lack of maturity, a lack of professional maturity. And so some friends of mine planted the idea in my head that, I might want to consider set design. They didn't know what they were talking about. They were, first year, writing students at USC. And they were like, Andrew, we think you'd be a great set designer. And I didn't know anything about it. I'd never even concerned myself with it. But I did have one contact, as it turned out, through a family connection, to a production designer, Neil Spizak. And he agreed to meet with me. Neil liked my work. It was nothing at the time. It was very, very minimal. But, having the presence in mind to realize that when an industry professional like Neil, we'll get to him, makes time for you, then it's time to jump on it. Once that door is just a little bit ajar, you really want to put your best foot forward. And what he said to me was, you couldn't be at a better place. If you're really thinking about the entertainment industry, you've got the architectural thing going, but what we do is architectural, it's not architecture. And there's an entire universe that you need to come up to speed on. Namely, this isn't about you. This is about the script, it's about the play, it's about the storytelling, it's about the director, it's about the executives, it's not about you. And he said the best thing you could do for yourself is to go take a technical theater class. You're at Yale, you're at one of the best theater programs in the world, and learn from this man. And so that's what I did. And it exposed me to, one of the key takeaways, for me early on was understanding that this really isn't about me as a designer. You really begin to embrace working with the director, working off a written narrative, whether it's a play like Hedda Gabler or Mother Courage or La Boheme, or whether it's a film. Like Infinity War, there are characters, there are worlds, there are sequences of events that occur and affect these people's lives. And what you're doing as a designer is you are supporting that visually. You are supporting the storytelling. And so that, the first taste of that I got, which is, by the way, an incredibly different experience for any designer than architecture. Architecture is a very different discipline. It's not a better or worse thing, but it's just a very different, sensibility.
That's another thing that, besides our choices of schools and professions and stuff, when Andrew says he had a varied work history in the architecture business, I relate to that directly. we both had different ideas. And this guy.
Yeah, this was Neil. This was that first contact of mine. Again, this is going back to a time before the internet, before Facebook, before Instagram. What you did back then was you wrote letters and you called somebody on the landline. So, I'd written him and he didn't do anything. And then, so I called him one day. And this was during the summers. I was using the summers coming back from Yale to sort of try and plant the seeds, so that I could start in the entertainment industry. And, I was just nervous as hell on the phone with him. I had nothing to show, but it really is an important takeaway tonight that a certain degree of fearlessness can serve you well. There was no reason for me to have any kind of confidence. All I did was tell him I was interested in maybe 5 minutes of his time. I was a first-year design student. I was interested in the entertainment industry. Could I meet with him for advice? And from that point on, I showed up in a suit with my portfolio woefully overdressed. Neil answered the door in shorts and a t-shirt, classic Hollywood. He had this, incredible home, and he was already successful. He'd already designed his first movie back then. It was called Pacific Heights. It was a Michael Keaton film.
And what else did he go on to design?
He went on to design Heat, which is an incredible film. It's an Al Pacino, Robert De Niro movie. He designed Face Off. He designed the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man. And he and I would work together years and years later. This sort of fledgling talent that, called him out of the blue and asked him for 5 minutes of his time. It wouldn't be till, I don't know, something like 2014, 2016, we would work on Terminator Genesis together, and I would work as his concept artist. Awesome. He was the production designer, but he was the one who really, I would come back from school, every year from the draw, and the first thing I did was enroll in the class and take the class, and then I would show him what I did in the class, and then he would meet with me and critique it, because he himself took this stuff really seriously, and he himself was teaching it at UCLA, and he would just give me feedback.
Okay, here we go. So when you were first out of the business, you were an art director. You were working, set designer. Really quickly, give them an idea, because this looks much more like architecture than it does anything film business.
Yeah, so this is the classic sort of set design world right here, and it's really not a better or worse thing for anybody that's listening tonight. I know the illustrations and I know the artwork, it's very interesting, it's very colorful, it's very visual, but set design is a quiet art unto itself. And this is really, it comes later in the process. You saw the sketches and you've seen some of the images. A lot of those images are generated early on in the project when there is this search for style, when we're really trying to figure out, and we're trying to land images with production. We're trying to land images with the director. And when you've got people like James Gunn and Kevin Feige from Marvel, that's a tall order, oftentimes, especially when you're doing something like Guardians. Here on Avatar, it's Jim Cameron, and it doesn't get any harder than that. Jim's mellowed over the years. He's a nicer person these days. I was recruited by them to work on the sequels. I didn't want to do it. I was having way too much fun on Infinity War. But back then, this was back in 2008. It could get really vicious. And so after that concept phase, basically what you want to do is you enter into a set design period where you're advancing and refining the concept art. Eventually, these sets are going to be made. Today, we're stepping into the world of Mandalorian, where a lot of this stuff exists in the Unreal Game Engine, but there still is a physical construction like we're seeing here. To get to that point, you can't build off the illustrations. You can't build off these images. Those images are geared to get executives and directors excited. The image we just saw, the drafted image is coming straight out of architecture. There's a plan in the lower left. Why is the image directly above it the way it is? Because when construction goes to build this, they're going to project up and they're going to construct exactly what you're seeing. Then they're going to project across. There's a section view. So this is classic architecture. It's not architecture. We're not keeping the rain out in the biolab. This is from the biolab, by the way. This is one of the first environments we see after Jake's landed in Pandora. The avatars are in those giant tubes. They've grown during the trip. But this is a constructed set, and it was constructed by a crew that was in New Zealand. We concepted Avatar in Jim Cameron's studio at Lightstorm in Santa Monica. There was a small team of set designers and concept artists that have been working on the project. The concept artists have been on for years. I was a set designer at the time. And, I was on the project for about 9 months, better part of a year. But the manner and mode in which we were communicating with the New Zealand crew was in the language of design. And the language of design is really twofold. It's drawings and models. And that was as true for Brunelleschi and Michelangelo in the Renaissance as it is for us today. Verbiage will only get you so far. It's important to talk about things, and sometimes you just don't have time to draw. But, set design is a key part, and model making, whether it's in 3D or whether it's in paper models, that is a key component. So it is the advancement and refinement of a design idea.
So, and now let's get into, we're going to see this image again, but this is also you consider to be a sketch. And but quickly, this is from Civil War, right?
Yeah, this is Captain America: Civil War.
Yeah, and if you could talk about the 3D model here, that you had constructed the 3D model, but then it's like so what, right? And it's, if you could go from there in terms of like what's missing, and you and I understand this.
Yeah.
But,
So,
yeah.
I mean, the way I work, I really don't, I'll be the first to say that, I'm not a great sketch artist. I never have been, never will be. And, I just found a way to work and a way to sketch and a way to draw in 3D. I just gravitated toward it, and so what I had done here, we knew that we had a scene in an abandoned missile silo. We knew that there was going to be a chase. We weren't sure exactly who the characters were going to be. We weren't sure if Winter Soldier or Iron Man were going to be pursuing one another, or whether we knew that Bucky wanted to get out of the silo and get free somehow. And we knew that they were going to tear this place apart. But you've got to be able to show this in a way that is compelling. Again, the ability to startle, the ability to convey some sort of spectacle, some sort of emotion in the meaning. This is dire. Somebody's clinging for their lives. Obviously Iron Man seems like he's out for blood. They're ripping the place apart. The image we saw before this is sort of how I start. I will block things in typically in 3D as close as I can, or as tightly as I can. We will have reference images to work from. And then the artistry comes in with that ice cold render that you just got out of whatever render you're using. You've got to somehow then turn on the artist in you. And the artist is all about edges, what the great, illustrator Andrew Loomis called the lost and found edge. It's about controlling edges. It's about foreground, middle ground, background. It's about palette. It's about, happy accidents that are happening, and it's about detail. It's about 1, 2, 3 reads, and it's about controlling where the viewer's eye is going to go. Here again, we've got a lot of mileage out of this render. I've got my perspective. I've got a character in the foreground. I've got the basic space, but we can't really show this. First of all, that we can show. We can show this because there's something happening there. There's an immediacy and there's an emotion that is in these images. And that's kind of the essence of what illustration is all about, because at the end of the day, you're trying to get people excited about what you're doing, and you're trying to nail the image just like the director and the executives are thinking of it, because when they don't respond to what you're doing, and this happens all the time, when you're working on a Marvel film, there'll be what's called a design review. And this happens in any studio, whether it's Warner Brothers or not. They will basically critique and review every image that you're doing. And first of all, the production designer has to be comfortable showing something that you, an artist, have produced. And conversations happen. It's like that first image you did, Andrew, was fine. I need to see it from the other way. They're not understanding, or we need to see what it looks like from reverse. Show us that. So that's kind of the essence of what these things are. I try to do as much damage as I can with my initial render, but then eventually there's going to be a 2D process that happens with me in Photoshop, where I turn on all of the skills that I've learned largely from other people, not myself. I have spent years basically coming in, spending my weekends, working at night, just to be a better artist and a better player, to be able to play my instrument better. And that's sort of been my the reason that's got me excited every day. And
I think early on in architecture school, we learned that people, and you were talking about this over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking, people, particularly the executives and the people who are going to write the $250 million check to have this thing made, don't understand images like this. It takes this, right? And we found that in architecture, we had a professor who said, you can draw all you want, but it's going to be the model. You have to have a way of presenting it to your client, these different ways. And Andrew has experienced the same thing, where he was working on a project where it was doing drawing after drawing, sketches, 3D models and stuff, but none of it, I think you said none of it was colored, right? You hadn't painted it yet. And you put the one in, and the guy at Disney was like, wow after the color, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
let's talk about the next one. We'll move along. We're going to drill down now into two specific areas in Infinity Wars. And if you could quickly talk about what this is. I mean,
So this was, yeah, this was my first day on Infinity War, and this is what I got handed. You know, for anybody that's seen the film, we had the Q ship. That was Ebony Maw's vehicle. You know, he's in league with Thanos. Yeah, you know, they kidnapped Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, and there's a scene with Iron Man in there. And you know, another concept artist had done an incredible job, Paul Chandler, on the exterior. They had already had that. My supervisor, Tom Brown, who is a very, very talented art director, had already sort of blocked out what a working concept here, just a concept model. And you can see it's extremely rough. It's literally held together with crazy glue and pins. And, you know, we tried to 3D print it, but, you know, it was just really, really fast, kind of shitty, you know, geo construction. And, you know, this is our set. And, you know, we've actually presented this to the directors, and, you know, they gave us a thumbs up. They gave us, you know, the go ahead to keep developing this. But if you look carefully, you know, there's an awful lot there that needs to be advanced. There's a lot that needs to be refined. There's a lot of detail and connection and resolution that need to happen. You know, so this was sort of a blessing. You know, in this way, you know, it's rare to get something like this. You know,
and what else? They also sent you this.
Yeah, and so, you know, with any project we work on, typically there won't be a model like that, but there will be a series of reference images. You know, the concepting here doesn't happen in a background, you know, in a vacuum. You know, this is something that, you know, everybody needs to understand, is that we don't wave our magic wands and suddenly all this great artwork comes out. I mean, that's not the way it works at all. I mean, you know, there's going to be, typically before I'm even on a film, there's going to be a conversation, you know, just like I said with James Gunn on Guardians of the Galaxy, there's going to be a conversation that's going to happen between the production designer, in this case, Charles Wood for Infinity War and Endgame, you know, and the Russo brothers. And they're going to have a conversation about what this Q ship is. And the way it was presented to me was, this is a Harley Davidson. Think of it like, you know, like a beater, you know, motorcycle. It's not a Star Destroyer. It's not a TIE fighter. It's a really rough hewn piece of equipment. And sometimes it'll be something like this, where set dressing has gone out and they found this condenser coil. You know, they found a found object that we think has a lot of potential. You know, we could cast this and use it as a platform. You know, we could look at some of these images. And so the creative process is really looking at the reference, transforming the reference to get something new. And this is one of the first things I did on my first day, you know, sort of looking at, you know, the model, realizing, you know, we could kind of beginning to understand it. It was a very complicated thing. You know, we had these big hemispherical arms, you know, called the donut, this thing, and seeing how we could apply some of the reference, some of the detail to this thing and begin to shape it and refine it from that early concept model that you saw to something that was a lot more sophisticated, you know, with several different layers of detail on it. And then understanding how these elements were all going to come together. You know, that's where the set designer in me kicks in, of resolving this stuff. Because here you can see that, you know, these pieces are all sort of colliding. You know, they're sort of defying gravity at this point. The deck looks we kind of got the right shape. It sort of looks a bit like the Millennium Falcon. It's cool, but it really needs some refinement. You know, this is an awesome first start. So this is, you know, again, refining the deck, you know, looking at the shapes and refining that entire model to a point, moving in the direction toward fabrication, and then testing out these ideas in illustrations, you know, testing them out under light, testing them out with characters, running it, you know, by submitting it to production. You know, you can see using 3D software like Rhino, you know, I'm basically reconstructing it and resolving how these components are going to work together. You know, it's a very complicated set, lots and lots of detail, insane angles. You know, you can't. It was just ridiculous. Here, you can see the reference image, you know, that I applied to the platform. You know, the idea is to transform, to take your inspiration. So, you know, the way I read that image is we've got these really kind of crude, heavy shapes, these heavy, sheet steel components in a really strong graphic pattern. But then there's this other read. There's this micro, secondary, tertiary level of detail. That could be the technology that runs the ship. You invent certain narratives for yourself, and then you express them artistically, and then you try and get it to a point where you can present them to somebody like the production designer. Yeah, here's some reference here. And the point in all of this is to look at what's relevant. If we look at what Paul had done to the exterior of the ship and to the interior, there was a fascination with one of the basic principles of design, and that's rhythm. We have this incredible rhythm here of these ribs. How can we apply that? We're not copying it. It's not a direct lift of this. We're taking the basic principle, and it is sparking thought to get something new.
And I've included this next image because we didn't recognize this as being That's former architects.
Awful fail.
But you would never get, this is this is next to the World Trade Center. You would never get this as a reference. It's too refined, it's too finished, it's recognizable. But this is amazing as a reference. And the references really do come from everywhere. I looked this image up. This is a former Soviet where they hid submarines along the coast in
it's an awesome space.
Underground spaces.
I love it.
Still we don't know what this is, do we?
Not yet.
We didn't figure it out. I couldn't. All that came up, Google identified it as a digital animation.
Well, and not all of these images are necessarily percolating in my brain. I will usually, when you're working with a crew like this, this was an extremely advanced group of people. I've never seen an art department quite like this, and there was a lot of pressure on me. I took a look at the concept art my first day, and I had one of my supervisors that I'd known for many years, and she's like, "What do you think?" And I said, "I don't know if I can play with these guys. I really don't. I mean, they're so freaking good." And I, was pretty much in terror the first few weeks on the show. I was sort of like just frantically grabbing things and looking at them and then trying to do something, halfway decent. But as time went on, and I think as the crew got a little more comfortable with me, because I was concerned they just weren't going to like me. They weren't going to like my work. And, that wasn't the case at all. We actually ended up having a lot more in common than I suspected. These guys were all about my age. They had all started as set designers. We saw design in a similar way. We'd all struggled and come up in a similar type of generation. And they responded to me as much as I responded to them.
And at some point, the conceptualization has to stop. Yes. And you got to build, right?
Yeah.
And so this is what you were doing before the concept. Then this moves into the set design world, where the set designers have to interpret what you've come up with, right?
Yeah.
And begin to build it.
Yeah, and typically what I do is, I've developed the capability to express myself as an artist, to work conceptually. So I typically like to stay with the project through the set design phase, because by then I typically know it better than anybody else, and it works better for the art directors to just keep me on that. So that's what happened here, is that we went through the concept stage of getting these ideas and relationships past the production designer and production in general. And then we entered a period where this thing is going to be made. What's green here is clearly green screen. And it's going to be visually extended. But this is part of this is a terrifying moment as well, because, with illustration, you are in the hot seat. It is like you are the lead guitar player. Everybody's looking at you. because you're generating these images that are hopefully keeping everybody else employed. Because if production doesn't like what they're seeing, they'll just say, listen, I'm sorry, this isn't working. Tomorrow's your last day, or we're going to go another direction and hire another crew. I mean, it really is show business. I mean, you do not have the time to waste. And if, you know, Marvel is not responding to what you're doing, if the director is not responding, if you as an artist and your production designer is not responding to you, it's up to you to fix it. But set design carries with it its own, you know, sort of horror show, in the sense that all of this is going to be made. It's people. There are going to be large teams of men and women. There are going to be robots these days that take our computer files with multi-axis printing. Material is going to start to be purchased. Money is going to start to be spent, and they're not kidding around. I mean, if there's a mistake, it's coming back on you, and you do not want that. You know, you don't. You might be able to, you know, mess up once and survive it. That's fine. You get a reputation of being the guy that's consistently wrong on dimensions. You're not going to work that much. So it's kind of terrifying. This was a what this is a it's a render that's a cinematic sort of wraparound panorama of the Q ship. You know, you load this into iPano, and you can move around on the set. And we found that this was a really nice way of working, in the sense that, you know, our production designer could walk on set with it, with the directors, and they could say, well, where are we? And it's like, well, you're here, you know, here, man.
Do you guys use VR? Do they use VR like with something like this, where they
do
can
now?
actually,
you know, it's really becoming, Mouse Guard was sort of really upended my workflow. It upended all my tools. It tripped up a lot of people, just because, you know, the world of visual effects and the world of live action have been on a collision course for years. I mean, we've been bumping up against one another for years. Now, a game engine, you know, most people, so many people play games, you know, whether it's Uncharted or whatever out there. And the way games are made, they're made with game engines, and you know, Epic, you know, has the Unreal game engine. You know, this is really becoming a thing for us in live action. It's starting to be utilized a lot more. On Spider-Man, our production designer was rabid about it, and you know, he made all of us work in Unreal. He loved working in VR, and he made presentations like that. So yes, it is becoming a big deal.
So here we have the Q ship.
Yeah, this is Paul Chandler's image, and you know, Paul, you know, there are so many artists that work in film. You know, Paul's been doing it a lot longer than me. You know, he's just many times greater, you know, visually than I am. And he had done this epic job on the exterior of the ship, and you know, was working with Charlie, you know, Woods, the production designer, long before you know, I was on the film. And you know, that's typically, oftentimes, the way it'll be. You know, another artist has made a pass at, you know, has done a pass on this thing, and you know, a lot of work has been done. Some things have survived, some things haven't. You know, I got handed the job of what does the specific part of the interior look like. So again, you can see how Paul is responding to the reference that we saw before. You know, this rhythm of that Calatrava building, for example, and you see it everywhere. You know, in the reference that we were looking for. It's looking at what you're given and finding creative and imaginative ways to apply it without, you know, not necessarily copying it, because you can't copy it. That's not gonna cut it. You know, we need a vehicle. So here's that breached entry point. So you can see that. Another one looking down.
Okay, and now we're going to get into the actual. Now you're going to get a sense of, which I was shocked. I'm shocked at the level of detail down to something the size of your hand.
Yeah.
It's the rendering on this, and we added that slide last night, and I was looking at earlier, which we're going to get to here in a little bit. It's shocking how much of this set is finished. I mean, it's rendered, it's finished out, and it may not see, the camera may never see it, but it's there.
It is there.
That completeness is there. It's crazy.
you can see what happened here. I mean, you know, John Sampson's crew. John Sampson was our construction coordinator. There's a whole team of men and women that are highly skilled builders. There's plasters, there's painters, there's carpenters. They're all responding to the drawings that I'm doing, and they're taking their cue. It's literally a blueprint for how this thing is made. So you see those the donut there, you know, intersecting into that form, just like it was in the 3D model. It's a very, very difficult intersection. It's something that's very hard to see.
Then we see this.
Yeah, that's right? An image I did, just testing out some of these forms, you know, and seeing what they look like under light, seeing how, you know, Ebony Maw might talk to Thanos. We might have it on a screen, you know, just a huge image, you know, seeing what the set could be, you know, when it's under light. You know, and again, this, you know, was one of the last things I did. By now, you know, we've understood, you know, the details. We've understood how these things are all going to connect. You know, we're way farther down the line. And when I say that, I mean, you know, this thing came together in about, I don't know, it's about 5 months, maybe 4 or 5 months, you know, from start to finish. But again, you know, at this point, we kind of understood the dynamics of what was going to be happening on the set. More specifically, you know, we could show a moment of it, and basically convince ourselves that we were going to be okay here, you know, that it was going to look good.
So we're gonna switch gears here for the next 2 images, and I think you told me you were given this, and how much time did you have to do something with it?
So this was on Mouse Guard. Yeah, this was just a day. You know, typically when there is this search for style, you know, on Mouse Guard, as on any movie, you're not hitting it. You know, you may be belting out these images and you may think you're doing great, but for whatever reason, you know, a director, and this is what I mean about it not being about you. If we go back to our earlier conversation with Meg and Neil, you know, when the director is making comments like, hey, I don't know about those buildings, you know, I really like the rocks, but I don't know. And you really get, that's a wake-up call, at least it is to me. Somebody's not liking your music, so to speak, and, you know, or somebody just rejected your cooking. You know, they don't like your lasagna bolognese. That's going back to the kitchen. You know, you got to get on it. And there's no time to waste. You know, you can get away with a couple of those, but eventually, if you keep missing, it'll be like, I'm sorry, but I need you to just back up your stuff. We're going to go another way.
So they came to you and you were given this, and
yeah, and you know,
and you had a day, right? And
yeah,
you had to do something with it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we basically got some negative feedback on a Monday evening. I was really pissed. I was frustrated. You know, and it was a very confusing and disorienting show. It was my first time with Unreal, that game engine, and we were working in a very different way, and still trying to play music. You know, still trying to actually emote as a visual artist. You know, and still trying to emote as a designer, and yet there was all this freaking technology in my way. So I was really it was not in the best of moods. And I just came in the next morning and cranked this for us. You know, the whole, what he was looking for was a citadel that felt like it was ensconced in the rocks, you know, almost like the Native American dwellings that you see in the Southwest. And, you know, there was clearly something, and this is what you have to be able to do as an artist. You have to be able to listen and be alert enough. You know, if we go back to the other image, Wes was a very capable artist in his own right. You know, he worked in Unreal, he knew it, and he had done this as a sketch. And there was clearly something about this image that he liked. You know, nobody could tell me. I didn't talk to him. I didn't know him very well back then. You know, but to me, if a director does something like this, and it's very rare to have a director actually be able to do this stuff, they may come in with an image that they like, but you have to be aware and focused and paying attention to the point where, okay, there's clearly something here. I'm gonna use that as a starting point, and I'm gonna make an adjustment. And it has to happen very, very quickly.
Yeah. And now we're gonna get into a lot of the set, and we'll go through this quickly. There's just I can't get over the detail in how scenic, you know, my God, it's an army of people that make this stuff.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
this was all being done in Atlanta, right?
Yes,
This was,
yeah.
you were not in Los Angeles.
No.
And there's actual fabrication shops. There's a whole army of people who are
At the stage. They're
at the stage,
Vinewood. Yeah.
making this.
Yes. Yeah.
And here's the underside of that, which is, again, stunning, that it's that level of detail. And to give you an idea of the size of this, I think, is this a standard grid? It's 40 feet up in the air. Is that right?
Yeah, we're in the
So
ferns at that point.
this is a shot from 40 feet in the air. And you can see the detail and the layering. Andrew talked a lot about earlier when we were talking, putting this together. It's layer and layer and layer, and it's we both have a love of music, and we talked about it's finding the right musicians in the right, where the music is layered, and it's not just one person.
That's something important for everybody to listen to understand, is that, you know, I don't work for Marvel. I'm not a Marvel employee. Everybody who I work with is pretty much like a session player. You know, we're a group of musicians that you might hire if you're making an album with someone like Beyonce or Pink or something like that. We're going to be the players that'll play on that album. There's a very unique skill set. It does take years to acquire. It's as much about your own sensibility and your own approach as it is about, you know, just knowing the software and understanding how to work with it. And it also is about your personality. And this is a really good example right here. This image is an example of just how many people are involved. You know, I've already done my thing by this point. You know, I've already developed these forms, I've modeled them, you know, I've illustrated them. Now comes the layers of set dressing and also the art direction. You know, this is Charlie Wood. You know, the man was, his background was architectural restoration. He knows how to talk to a scenic artist, a painter. He knows how to talk to a plasterer. He's got a vision of his own. I could never have predicted this kind of texture, this kind of color. Just amazing what he's able to achieve, you know, and that has nothing to do with me. There are so many different people who bring their expertise. Just the people who constructed this, you know, are capable of building whatever we throw them. I could give them the space shuttle, or I could give them a frickin' barn from the Middle Ages, and they do an epic job.
Is there a hero shot? This was the image that Andrew sent me last night, and we added. And he's, I don't know what you would call these links or whatever this is along the edge here, but they're all scenic. They're all been painted, and they're all, I mean, the level of detail down to
the burn grease, burn residue is.
Yes, when you look at the lower right side down in there, no one's going to see that, but it's got to be there because, just because, and even here on this deck portion on the lower left side, the whatever these protrusions are that are kind of floating in there, it's just amazing. Now we'll get on to the engine room. And obviously, this is, I don't know if we have this out of order or not, but again, the level of detail in this thing, and we talked about this, a studio executive who's going to green light the project he wouldn't know what the hell he was looking at, right? This is crazy talk to him.
This is a great image to show a builder. You know, this is again that set design. You know, the design has been advanced and it's been refined. You know, the measurement is there. It's going to scale out. The radiuses are all correct. It's tight as hell. You know, there's no issue here. It's going to be great, but you can't. You really can't show a director or an executive an image like this, because typically the feedback you're going to get is, well, is it going to be gray? You know, I mean, sadly, I mean, that's happened. You know, if you just show a 3D model, or, you know, if you just, you know, you give them these architectural views, I mean, most people just don't They don't get it. And, you know, what their brain is in the storytelling. You know, if you're talking about a guy like Kevin Feige, you're talking about an executive, or Victoria Alonso, you're talking about executives who are really passionate about the story. You know, they've spent an incredible amount of time crafting the MCU. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is, despite what Martin Scorsese says, a lot of thought has gone into this place, okay? And it's, there's a lot going on. All of these characters relate to one another. They all have backstories. Each movie has been about introducing one of them to everyone. And, you know, their brains are focused on the storytelling and about the relationships and about what's happening. So when you show them something like this,
let me go back here. Yeah, go ahead.
This is a great thing to show John Sampson, our construction coordinator. This is a great thing to show Charles Wood, because Charlie, a production designer, is a visually literate man. He can understand, of course, these are the conventions of the art department. This is the language of design. Of course, he can understand it, and he can, you know, say, "Great, Nate, go forward," you know, or not.
But with reference material, and this is a Soviet sub that I found an image just to throw in here because I thought it looked really close to what we're going to get into next. But you can show this to a lot of people, and they're like, "Oh, that's what those little balls look like," right? I mean, they may not even know what the hell they're looking at here. And again, the 3D, and it's still, this is not enough for some people to know what they're looking at. And this is a funny image because I love the bucket and the right.
Well, also you can see how we've omitted that inner ring. It's all green, you know, because the point is that they were supposed to be turning, you know, for everybody here, this is ostensibly the engine room of the Q ship. And the whole idea here, this scene never made it into the movie, believe it or not. That's how wasteful this can be. But this was a scene where Iron Man has broken into the Q ship. Doctor Strange is being tortured by Ebony Maw. Strange is going to leave his body and his corporeal self, and he's gonna you know, come down to the engine room where Iron Man is desperately trying to sabotage the ship, and he's like, "Anytime now, you know, anytime." So it was a great, you know, sort of simultaneous action that was supposed to be happening, and
this wasn't used.
This was not used, believe it or not. It broke my heart. Just
it's tens of thousands of, probably more than that, right?
Yeah.
Of dollars in time.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
It's crazy.
I learned a lot. You know, we had an amazing, you know, experience building it and designing it. But yeah, you know, you can see the art direction there. I mean, that looks like, you know, this caked on burnt steel, you know, that literally was something I did in ZBrush. It was cast, it was molded, but the finish on here, I mean, the artistry and the ability of these art directors was extraordinary. Really, really great.
It's crazy. It is a wasteful. It's unbelievable.
But here in the reference, you can see, you know, images like this are there for us to draw inspiration from. You know, again, none of this happens in a vacuum. There's a 3D model I did. You know, and it's extremely uplifting, even when even when it's in the movie for a bit, or it's not in the movie, or, you know, something happens disastrous, you know, as it did with this one. At least there's the satisfaction of having an idea in your head and working away at something, seeing it constructed, seeing it come out. I mean, the set designer in me is always going to, you know, just really get excited when I see this stuff made.
And what happens with this, like something like this colossal thing they built, when they're done filming?
Well, you know, one of two things. It can go into storage. Typically, it can be LiDAR scanned. It can be visually extended. It can end up into the dumpster. You know, it has the lifespan of these things. The end goal is the image and the scenes in the film. It's not the built construct on the soundstage. You know, that's a hard one to get over when you come from architecture.
Yeah. So there it is.
Yeah, and that's an image looking down this corridor, Iron Man, you know, struggling with this thing, trying to sabotage it.
And the next is the animation. If you could explain why you had to do an animation.
Yeah. So we had, as you can see, the ship was super complicated. And, we had simultaneous action going on between the flight deck, which we've already seen, and we just saw the engine room. And, production, the directors and the executives were really confused. They were like, we don't understand where we are, in the ship. It looks great, but we just don't know where it is. So, this is about learning, and it's about always trying to work on your game. Today we have so many different tools, so many different ways to communicate imagistically what we're doing. And so I did this in this very sort of amateur, animation, basically a fly through, showing where this thing was, linking it, right behind us was a door that led to the flight deck, so that they could understand this. And then I followed it up with an illustration basically taken from the last shot, so that it would then tie to what Paul was doing. So it's a communication tool. That's what you're trying to do. You're supporting, there's the image, you're supporting the storytelling, through these environments, through these images, and you're leading your client, which is the director and the executives, along. They understand the story as a narrative. They're looking for a visual representation of it.
So if you could talk, this is an important, this is really important to you personally, this image. And if you could tell our students, tell our audience why.
Yeah, well, I think it's an example of, how you never give up and how you never quit. When I first started on Avengers, I told you I took a look at the concept art, and, it wasn't my first barbecue. I had illustrated before, I had, worked conceptually, I had designed, but looking at the concept art from the UK, it was a UK crew. The reason they were there in Georgia with us is that there was no stage space in London left, or in England left, for them to work on. It was all taken over by the Star Wars films. So they had come to Georgia, which is a heavily incentivized state. It has lured production away from Los Angeles. And ironically, it was a team of Americans and a team of Brits working together. And this team of Brits, were phenomenal, as I've said. They were phenomenal art directors. We had an amazing production designer. They also had extraordinary artists working on the film, not just Paul, but 3 or 4 other guys that have become friends since then to me. And I took a look at their work, and I was just like, so I had approached the supervising art director with the prospects of me working conceptually, and I was dying to illustrate. I was dying to work more and work less like a set designer and more like an illustrator. And he sort of looked at me and he said, "Hey mate, you've seen the hallway. We had this double loaded hallway filled with like 30 by 42 sheets of all this artwork. It was, just really overpowering." He said, "That's the level, that's the bar we tried to get to on this film." And so it's sort of like a bit of a kick in the balls. I mean, I went home thinking, oh man, holy deflation. So, but I kept at it, and there was this opportunity, and I kept doing it. And so I kicked out this image, and some friends of mine, about a couple days later, came up and said, "Hey, dude, your work's in the hallway. Did you know that?" And Ray came up to my desk that day, and he did a double take because I had the image up, in the cubicle that I was working in, and he was like, "Is that yours?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I thought it was one of our boys." Okay, well, we need to make some changes around here. And what happened is that, he got me into what's called the Illustrator's Craft at the Art Directors Guild, just basically making it legit. And I began working much more as an illustrator on the film after that. So it really is, it's an example of, even when somebody gives you a soft no or a hard no, you never give up. You're constantly working on your game, and there's an opportunity, and there will be opportunities for you. And when those opportunities arrive, whether it's Neil Spizak saying, "Yeah, come on over, I'll meet with you," whether it's an opportunity like that, the door just got pushed ajar like maybe 1 inch, and you're looking in going, "Ooh, what's that?" Or whether it's something like this, where initially somebody is really not convinced that you're up to the task, but you keep coming, and you're just not going to take no for an answer. there's a lesson in that sometimes, good things do in fact happen, that you should never quit.
And again, it all starts, I think, this image, there's something about this image to me that's really precious, because this thing held, this image in a way, and this model holds all of that you just talked about in the previous 70 images. It holds it in there, and it's a matter of sussing this stuff out, right? And here you are. And so in that model we end up here, and there you go. And we'll take some questions, but thank you so much. I mean, it's really, actually, one of the things I want to ask for the questions is, you said to me, and this is this answer, yes, this is absolutely, when he said this to me, I'm like, I'm gonna ask you this again. You work on, like, where you're deficient in terms of whether it's I don't know, designing sidewalks or something, or a proper looking sidewalk. But you said to me, the figure, and you're always, and what do you do every morning now? You just said it to me earlier today, or it was last night, I forget when we talked, but
I think that just because I'm not a formally trained artist, I really don't have any art background. I mean, everything that I've learned how to do has come from watching, having the enormous benefit of working with superior talents, who are happy to give me 5 minutes, if I put artwork in their drop boxes in the morning. When you come to work on these films, you're surrounded by really, really great artists who've been doing it for a long time. And most of them aren't crazy enough to switch careers or, do things like start as a set designer and work as a concept artist. Most people pick a lane. And so I've learned from them over the years. And one of the observations with my work is that it's always architectural. There's always obviously a love of environments, but oftentimes as an illustrator, you're going to want to be able to show in your work that you're definitely working on Spider-Man, or you're definitely working on Avengers, or you're definitely working on Game of Thrones. How do we do that? We often do that with characters, and it's the ability to do that. So I draw.
You draw every morning, right? You get up and sketch.
Now I do.
Every morning.
Yeah. Now I do.
Kids. He gets up he's just past 40 years of age. That's a lie. But he gets up every morning and he sketches. And this is something that we talked about this the other night. My wife thinks that there's a real similarity. She hasn't met all my friends.
It's just awful.
No, but it doesn't matter. You work on this all the time, and you're thinking all the time, and it is it's what my wife said the other day after she listened to us talk. She goes, you're one of the first, you're one of my first, it's one of the first friends she's been around, that we went through kind of the same education, and we have the same vibe. You got to work on it all the time. And it's what we were talking, I said this to you last night. It's what we would be doing at night and on the weekends anyway, if we had a job at Target or something, right? We're managing stuff. This is a lifelong pursuit.
Yes.
And there's no retirement from it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't
turn it off.
This is what you do, right?
Yeah.
As an artist.
Yeah.
And that was, when we were in architecture school, there's some real believers in there, man. They're hardcore, much harder. Oh my God. It is, but you don't shut it off. And then my other question to you is, were you a big comic book fan, or were you kind of casual comic book fan when you were growing up?
I was a big fan.
Yeah.
I was, I definitely, yeah. I mean, I used to draw comics, not very well. And I was a fan. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's if all of you watching, you take anything away from this, is this guy, he's working at home right now. He would only talk to me either during lunch his lunch hour that he takes at his house as he's working remotely or on the weekends. He's that serious, and it's it is you don't. He's very modest about his place in this. I checked it out. There's not a lot of people like him. Basically, when they're making whatever Marvel show that he's on, there's probably a good chunk of the people like Andrew are on that, and they may be on another film, and there's not a lot left over. it's a very and it's taken him years to get there, but it's doable, and it's
yeah, that's the takeaway. I mean, this didn't just happen. You know, you guys have got to understand that, you know, you get there when you get there. There isn't a lot of, you know, natural talent with me. There's not a lot of natural skill. You know, John Wooden was 50 years old when he won his first national basketball championship for UCLA. I mean, you get there when you get there. And oftentimes that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's plenty of talented people out there who just burn out or they don't apply themselves. You're not going to get there just on natural skill. You're going to have to constantly work at your game. You guys have an enormous advantage over someone like myself and Bob in the sense of having the World Wide Web, YouTube, things like that at your disposal. You know, now more than ever, knowledge has been democratized. It's literally at your fingers. You know, we had to go hunt for it in some library or just never discover it. The bad news for all you guys is that there are so many more people now. It's so much more, it's very competitive. And software, the digital age, which you guys have grown up in, it is constantly changing, you know, and you think it's hard to keep up now when you're 23, try it when you're 55. I mean, it's really freaking hard. You know, it gets harder. You know, your brain just.
Yeah. This is a good question. This is from Autumn. You put an incredible amount of detail into your design. What helps you stay motivated with your current project instead of burning out? You should tell them how fast these things happen, right?
Oh yeah. We're asking how do I remain motivated on a particular movie?
Like how long were you in Atlanta working on Infinity Wars and Endgame?
That was a year and a half.
And it blew, and it I think you told me earlier, it blew by, right?
Yeah.
Like
it did.
It's so fast.
Yeah.
And
you're always under, you know, the deadlines they're unrelenting. You know, I mean, the film business, it's savage. You know, it's a barbaric lifestyle. You know, it's 12 hours a day. You know, it is now more than ever.
That's actually, to tell them, in the film business, a 12-hour day is a normal day.
That's a normal day.
Yeah. It's not they make you stay an extra 4 hours. That's a normal day.
That's a normal day.
Joanna, you want to go through? You've been looking at the questions. I'm just seeing some of them, but
I mean, I guess let's start with that. Like, let's say you're hired for a film. We can just use Infinity War. Could you just talk a little bit about like how long does each step of the process take? Right?
Oh,
like, Like, what's the sketching part? How long does it take to kind of move into, say, building models and then into sets?
Well, it's very short. You know, typically, like I said, the lifespan of a movie is maybe a year total. I won't be on the film for a year. It's more like 6 months, maybe 9 months. You know, I was on Spider-Man for a year, but you know, COVID happened and we shut down. I mean, if you come on as a concept artist, there's going to be a blue sky period of maybe a month where it's a little lax. You know, it's just you and the production designer and maybe a couple of your friends. And, you know, there's sort of a loose idea. Maybe there's no script, perhaps. You know, we just kind of have some roadmaps, you know, to start working on. But we're generally going to spend, you know, maybe 2 months, you know, maybe 3 in concept. You know, then we're going to move into the set design phase for another 3 months or 4. And then we're going to move into the construction phase, you know, which is going to be another 3 months after that, and then principal photography. And then you go to editing. So, you know, if you're working at a place like Marvel, you know, they could be loving what you're doing, Any studio, Warner Brothers, Universal, they could be loving what you're doing, but suddenly there's a shift. An actor drops out of the schedule, or something happens with the script. They finally decide to write one, if it's the case in Marvel. But what happens is that your time, there's always an urgency. You're never bored. I've never gotten to that point. I think that's the thing, is that I'm as excited to wake up every morning and get to my desk. I can't wait. Than I, as much so, if not more, than I was when I was a student. There's not enough time for me to really get bored with what I'm doing, and I can't predict what it is that I'm going to be working on next. I don't know if it's going to be a medieval scene, or if it's going to be, something that we've never seen before, and that's supposed to be 200 years in the future. I am bombarded with information. The software is constantly changing. It requires me to practice, and I spend most of my time practicing. And I practice by giving myself design briefs, by giving myself things to design, and applying techniques that I see other people doing for myself.
There are several questions about avoiding burnout and staying motivated and inspired. And maybe that's just not your personality, but have you ever faced that, or what's helped you?
I don't think it's burnout. I mean, there's a certain modicum of exhaustion. I certainly was not in the best of states, at the end of the year after a year on Spider-Man, but there's reasons for that. It was a very difficult thing to be away from home for that reason. I think, I don't think it's artistic burnout. I think that the way software is changing, it's very frustrating. And it's kind of like playing an instrument. And everybody knows that, who plays the guitar knows that the 12th fret is the 12th fret, the 5th fret is the 5th fret, and the 3rd fret is the 3rd fret. We live in a world today where that's not necessarily the case, that just when you're starting to learn something, there's a new version of it, and they've shifted it. And now, they've added a string, or they've added a fret. So it is difficult in that way to keep up to date and to keep learning. But it's just, I've never gotten to a point where I've really been burned out. I will actually continue to work on the film after it's done, because there are things about it that I want to change, or that we didn't get to do, or there were things that another artist I saw. Today, I think that's the one thing that really keeps me going, is what my peers and my colleagues are doing. I have the benefit and the great, joy of working with some of the top artists in the world. These are men and women that could blow me away in a heartbeat. And I am constantly working on my game, because I'm seeing what they're doing. It's not necessarily a competition per se. I mean, we are in competition, but it's never been cutthroat in the art department. It's always really supportive. But when you put your work in somebody else's hand, as I've done for years, and you watch their hand glide across your image, and it's like, hey, this is what's working. This is an area that I would have changed. And you look at the techniques they're doing, and you look at the way they approach things, it's incredibly inspiring. So for me, the most frustrating thing is being in a situation where I don't know how to do something. I've got a problem to solve. And
that's a great segue, because there's a bunch of questions on here about when you do have an art block. So you have that block, you're like, you can't come up with an idea, or you're stuck, right? And we certainly experienced that in undergrad and grad school, where you have, for whatever, not that you're really afforded much time to work it out in that business, but in terms of art block, or they give you a rock, how do you get going again, or how do you get around when you're kind of stuck?
I get going with reference. It's my saving grace. I think one of the worst things you can possibly do is design in a vacuum. To just sit there looking at an open version of Photoshop with a blank canvas. I mean, that's something that, artists, painters will prime the canvas. You'll actually get some movement on the canvas. There'll be a sort of a play of darks and lights happening. Just anything but, beige canvas. And, for me, when I get stuck, what I always do is, I'll go to the internet, I'll go to Pinterest, I'll go to my friends, I'll go to a friend of mine who's just got an enormous library of just images that he's organized it, he's just an incredible, and I'll say, I'm trying to do this, and he'll oftentimes bombard me, with stuff. That's why having, a group of people around you that are as excited about things as you are. And, I find that reference, my artistic eye, I'm the kind of guy that, I'll be walking down the sidewalk and I'll see a puddle, and most people just step over it and it's just a puddle. For me, it could be an interesting silhouette for a vehicle. Again, when you're looking at the world, a door is not a door and a window is not a window. There's a certain amount of convention that you just have to let go of when you're an artist. And there's going to be happy accidents when you literally turn something upside down and it looks better. And, fair game. We're in the world, especially in movies, of things being subjective, and there are no rules. No one cares how you got there. They just care about the final result. And so when I get stuck, the first thing I do is just saturate myself with something completely different, and I'll have to sleep on it. I'll usually have to get a decent night's sleep if I can and come back to it the next day. But it's a big mistake to just sit there in a kind of helpless way without some help from the rest of the world.
I think people are interested in also how did you know when it was time to make a shift, whether that was from way back, moving out of architecture into entertainment, or when you talked about wanting to move from set design into more illustration, like what surrounded those decisions or allowed you to know that you wanted to make those leaps?
Well, the world was making the big bad world had shown up when I graduated from Yale. I mean, in academia, you're not subjected to the same kind of forces. And, I knew just because of my own shortcomings, I was losing jobs, I was losing work. I had really not proven myself. And in the working world, I hadn't supported myself. And I knew that there was certain things that I just wanted to accomplish. I wanted to own a home. I wanted to, be able to afford a car. I wanted to be able to afford energy bills and that type of thing. I wanted to be self-sufficient. And, I was losing work and I could not support myself and I could not hold a job and I was really messing up. And, the show business, the entertainment industry was sort of the last station on the line for me. I had one shot. I had this one contact who had agreed to meet with me. My future was literally hanging by a thread. I was like, you mess this up, that's it. You're in a free fall. There's no, you've blown it. You've had all this education, and you've been set up, in a position that is so much more fortunate than so many other people, and you've found a way to screw it up. So, for me, I knew that this was this was a turning point, and this was a chance for me to make a fresh start. And, my first day in the industry, I knew that I'd made the right choice. And it was informed by, at least 2 years of really negative experiences in architecture. So, that was one. And I always knew I got my first Lego set when I was 6. And so I knew right from that age that I enjoyed making things. And as great as set design is, and as great as, the practice of that and how it drew from architecture, it was also incredibly confining. The art department is structured in a union. There's a union, it's called the Art Directors Guild. And there's an old world status of crafts. The art directors are managers, the illustrators are illustrators, that's what they do. The set designers are set designers. And the union has a very, when people are being abused in the workplace, unions have their place. But that's why they're here. But when you get into a situation where they are stifling the natural creative development and the natural trajectory of you as an artist and a designer, then it's a problem. And the way the guild has been structured, people like me who were artistic, who dreamed of contributing in ways, not just through set design, but through actual design and concept work, were being held back, because I didn't have that title. I was slipping in the illustrations on Guardians and in all these movies, on Terminator. Everybody knew that I had this sort of conceptual way about me, but I was not legit in the sense that I was not a member of the Illustrator craft, and I was not being hired. I was not getting jobs that way. And I was really, it's very difficult. And this is another thing for everybody to realize, that once you get good at doing something, it's very difficult to change perception. You know, once everybody knows you as a lead guitar player, nobody's going to want to consider you a singer. They're not going to want to consider you as a bass player. Once you get known as a bass player, they don't want to consider you as a lead guitarist. I mean, set design, when you really think about it, is like the rhythm section of the band, right? It's measurement. It is keeping time. It is a really important thing. Are you in the hot seat like an illustrator? Not really. You know, it's a very different sensibility. Both are very important, but it's
the way
you broke,
but the way you broke out of that though is you kept working at it on your own time.
That's right.
And it is
persistence. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say to all of them, and Andrew would agree, if you go back 35 years, you go back 35 years and you ask us what we're going to be the next great architect, because we're all your age. And you have to let things flow over you and around you, and you have to find what you are meant to do, and the academy, the institution, is not the place to do that. You have to get out there and you find something that you're kind of good at, and you practice and you keep going. And that's what Andrew is. He's still practicing. He may be, he wants to be Eddie Van Halen, alive, Eddie Van Halen, but he wants to be that kind of virtuoso. So he practices. He gets up in the morning and he practices sketching. Joanna's smiling, I know, because it's like, that's a crazy.
Well, I have one last comment about, I mean, the other aspect is really people. They played an important role in your life, Neil, Spizak, and even your collaborators. Could you offer any advice to our audience? Just how would you suggest people approach someone, or to get their foot in the door, or kind of reach out in those ways?
Well, you really do have to just engage the person. You know, today we have so many different ways to communicate, with all the tools that we have. But, I find that, having the respect for another person's skill set and knowledge. And, certainly with Neil, he was older than me. There was a natural sort of respect that I had for him. He was doing something that I thought was so interesting. And that's how I came across in a very genuine way. I mean, how could I not? It's just, I don't know any other way to do it. And I used some very primitive tools, to contact him, and he responded. A lot of doors are going to get pushed in your face. I don't recommend doing what I do for a living to anybody. This is not something you want to do if you want a conventional, normal life. This is for somebody that's very different, and it's not a better or worse thing, but this is a terrible way to live, on many levels. But, I find that the art department, it's a very supportive place. And most of the people, certainly when I was learning, and I still am learning, most of the illustrators that I would approach were some of the most talented that the Guild had to offer, because these were big movies like Star Trek. We had guys like James Klein and Ryan Church. These are famous illustrators in Hollywood. They now work at ILM. And, these guys had nothing. They weren't afraid. They certainly, I posed no threat. They had so many years on me. And, most set designers just wouldn't do this. And I guess most people just wouldn't do it. But I've always had a certain amount of fearlessness. I'm not afraid to walk up to somebody and engage them, and so what I would do is literally work at something. It's always best if you do some heavy lifting by yourself, rather than expect somebody to hold your hand. That's not going to get you anywhere. But it's always good if you can have, even if it sucks, even if it's terrible, to make an effort. And then what I would do is I would come in the morning and, I'd come up to David Levy, for example, we were working together on Tron, sitting next to one another. He's one of the top concept artists in the world. And I said, I'd really like to learn about painting. I've never painted before in Photoshop. And he said, well, I come in every morning at 7:30 to warm up, before we start. You can come in with me and I'll look over your shoulder. I mean, what a freaking gift. That I got that for free on that movie. Now, no one was doing that. People were just coming because it's a job to most people. Set designers are doing their thing, ding, 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 and then, the illustrators are doing their thing. But there's no cross-pollination. But I was sitting next to him, and it's like sitting next to a musician who's playing the same instrument as you, and he's getting completely different sounds. And it's a chance to learn. And if you're genuine, and if the person is a good person and not threatened and just a decent human being, and I lucked out with guys like David and Ryan Church and all of these artists that I've been working with all these years. They were more than happy to take 5 minutes, go in their Dropbox, pull up my stuff in Photoshop, and they'd say, okay, all right, design is cool, but here's what I would do. And I just watch their hands just glide across with their stylus. Yep. And within 5 seconds, they'd fixed my work. So
if we go back to the beginning of the talk, it was people that you went to high school with, right, that were working in the film business?
They were students at USC.
You knew them. They were friends, right?
Yeah, they were friends from high school.
Friends.
Yeah.
And my introduction to Hollywood when I got out of grad school was through JR, who he's a production designer. He does commercials out in Los Angeles currently. It's your friends. You guys are I'm seeing a lot of questions like, how do I get into this? We have a film school. Get to know the people in the film program, or get to know. Also, you have Instagram, and you pound, if you're working on these images, you pound somebody's Instagram account you tag them, or their Twitter account. They will see your work. You've just got to keep getting it out there and taking a shot. Yeah,
you can't take no for an answer, but again, I know this is very seductive. I know that, I know it's very sexy, all this stuff, but look, this is a cautionary tale. It really is not a life for anybody that wants a conventional life. It may look great from a distance, but when you start living it, it's a very different story. And
they're all artists. All these people know this already. We tell them as soon as they come in, like, this ain't the business school, man. It is, but okay. It's a difficult life.
It's a very hard life.
But you love it, and you wouldn't be doing anything else.
Well, I can't really do anything else. I really can't. I mean, it's kind of like, it's like that delicatessen scene in Heat, when De Niro and Pacino were talking to one another. It's like, can you do anything else? I can't do anything else. And they're on both sides of the moral spectrum, but, I really can't. I mean, this was my last shot. I had all this education to do architecture, and I had failed miserably. It just wasn't working out. I just didn't have the tools. And part of it, as I say, was a deficit in skill. So I am, acutely aware of, the importance of having a skill set and being able to do things for people, and you don't know what they're going to ask you to do, but you've got to be ready. And it's like John Wooden said, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. I mean, even when you're not working on something, you're working. And, the more I succeeded, my success is directly, it has two things. It's my personality, I can tell a good joke, and I can really work with people when I want to. And I also have a skill set, I also have a knowledge base.
I would say your biggest thing is you don't have an off switch. Like you go.
No.
Yeah. And you got to keep going. So some really rapid fire questions. What's your favorite film you've ever worked on?
Well, Infinity War and Endgame really, I mean, before that it was Avatar. Avatar was really, really hard on the brain, but it was fun. It was fun. Tron was really fun. But I gotta say, Infinity War, Endgame were just.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite film all time that whether you worked on it or not?
Wow, boy.
Come on.
That's a tough. I don't know. There's too many of them. I mean, I love Heat. I keep watching it.
Well, you can't. I mean, Val Kilmer shooting down whatever the street that was in LA with that ponytail is pretty sexy.
There's
It's
just
awesome.
something. Well, there's something about a Michael Mann film, and it isn't for everybody. But the way the guy uses the city of Los Angeles, where I'm from.
No, because Los Angeles became a character in the film, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that's again a part. We're looking at this over the top, world of design. So much of movie making, Spider-Man was a lot like this, and it's a shame we can't show the images tonight. But it was about the subtle art of the ordinary. It was about using ordinary things and yet making them cinematic, which is another sort of artistic transformation.
Okay, we got and Siri and Olive, to your question, if we could have shown you Spider-Man, what he just came off of, that would answer your question. But we can talk more. And by the way, all the kids out there, just as the director of the program, I hope everything's going well your first week. If you have any issues, concerns, or anything, you know where to find me. I'm in ComArt. You can always email me. And thank you for coming back to school. We can never. It's great that you're here. I wish I could see all of you. And yes, to the sophomores, I still owe you a meal. I'm good for it. I know I'm gonna get asked. I'm good for it. So, Joanna, thank you so much. Andrew,
thank you.
Oh, my brother. Thank you, buddy.
And
love you.
I also think you're incredibly modest, and
He's too modest. This has been a constant theme for 35 years. Yeah. Like, and he's so talented, and it's
Okay,
I still think we should get the band back together, but that's another conversation altogether.
Anyway, all right, well, thank you, everyone. And for those in the class, I'm going to hang out on Zoom. And again, it's been a pleasure tonight, and a great way to start the semester. So thank you both, Bob and Andrew.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.